Welcome to a beautiful Wednesday afternoon. A great day to be alive. And today I learned what a FUD is. So if you've looked at YouTube recently, they have their little shorts section, which I guess is their answer to TikTok. And sometimes I'll look through, they're mostly cats. But I saw one that was how to get kicked off a gun range in 5 seconds. And it shows a kid at the gun range there, and he pulls out his AR-15 and starts going, gah, 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 which is apparently a big no-no on most gun ranges about, rapid firing and things like that. And in the comments, they're all talking about, oh, this is a FUD range. Yeah, FUDs, and just kept saying the word FUDs. And I was like, okay, what's a FUD? And so I looked it up, and the nice thing about being out of the know, not staying on internet 24/7, is you get to enjoy these memes that have long since passed, and you don't get mad about them anymore because everyone's moved on. And so I looked up what a FUD is, and I enjoyed the memes, and now here's a little taste, and you can enjoy the memes too. Okay, but anyway, moving on, we are going to talk a little mini content here about what this game is. And it seems kind of dumb given all the videos I've shot about this, but I still see questions, especially about trajectories and intel markers and intel limit and things like that, and people still seem to be getting hung up on that. So I thought I'd go over, and the designer came on and started talking about this as well. I'm actually going to do a lot of his stuff verbatim here and try to just kind of set it up so it's nice and tactile and you can actually visualize what he's talking about here. So let's set that up. All right, let's start with what this is. And I said this in the very first tutorial video I did, but it bears repeating. And that is that this does not represent the battlefield. This represents a map that represents the battlefield. It's a meta on top of a meta. And so when you're doing something like this, don't. We have to go back to the inspiration that the designer was, and I think he went to the museum. It might have, I don't know what it was. It was a Bletchley Park. Anyway, there's a museum dedicated to the kind of the intelligence section of it, and you can see the maps, and you can see the little boxes with the little spools of yarn, and that's what they did. So if they got a report, so they get a report, oh, I have a report of a task force moving out of Germany, heading, north, whatever that is, and at 15 knots or something like that. But that's all I know, and it's just a report. And so he'd take out a little pin probably with a little flag on it, and he'd stick the pin into the map, and then he'd wind a little bit of yarn around it, and he'd go up to here, and he'd stick another pin in there, and he'd wind the yarn up there. And as his intelligence came in, he'd just start adjusting everything here. And he wouldn't do that just for the enemy, he'd do it for his own troops, because, and I'll talk about this here in a little bit too, he'd have his own task force on here, his friendly task force. And that's actually still pretty limited knowledge as well, because we're all operating on things like radio silence and not giving your position away, and which means you're also kind of putting your allies in the dark as well a little bit, just to keep information out of their hands. So hang on, let me just read from here. It's the back page of the tutorial manual, and I do recommend reading this. Read it back to front, really, and that's just going to get you in the head here. And of course, he's going to spend a lot of time talking about why there aren't U-boats in here, because that's what everybody just hounded him about when he was making the game. Where's the U-boats? Where's the U-boats? And I'm sure he got pretty sick of answering the question. But on the very back here is where he gets into doing and knowing. Atlantic Chase is designed on the premise that the player is removed from the battlefield. What sits before you on the game before the task force display. Information. When you look at a trajectory stretching from Halifax to Clyde ports, you are not seeing a task force. All you are seeing is information about a task force. This is not semantics. If you are the British player, by performing a trajectory action that plots those segments across the Atlantic Ocean, you are revealing information to your opponent and to yourself. It means you know that a task force launched from Halifax and will hopefully reach Scotland. The scale of the game is large enough that certain details can remain vague, such as the precise moment of launch. That's good because it means we don't bother with hiding information from the German player. We can even let them see what's in the task force. A battleship, a convoy, a battleship escorting a convoy. German intelligence garnered from spies, captured prisoners, maybe captured charts, and intercepted signals, along with educated guesses, allow that sort of information to pass freely from one player to the other. It improves realism. All right. Now we move on here, and I'm going to go to where he started talking, answering some more questions on the BGG forums. Going back to that key word, information. I sound like the prisoner. Information. You won't get it. By hook or by crook, we will. Anyway, when it comes to information, it has two components, space and time. A trajectory represents both temporal and spatial information, time and space. A long trajectory provides less information than a short trajectory. For information to be useful, it can't just offer when, and it can't just offer where, and it has to offer both when and where of a task force's location. He goes on. To intercept a task force, we can't just put our airplanes or ships on a point along the target's path of travel. So if you were like going here, it's meaningless. We need to put them on at a point at the very same moment that the target is also at that point. A trajectory segment in a hex tells us that a task force will pass through that hex, but it won't tell us when. Attach an intel marker to it. Where we got? And now we have information about the when. Well, the intel marker is generic. The game won't tell us the nature of that information or its source. Context can clue us in, but the game is not detailed enough to tell a very specific story. And let us set up another example here. Bling! Okay, we have a German task force here, and intersecting the British task force here. Now, in this example he gives, he kind of arbitrarily puts an intel marker on here. And this is where, kind of the narrative imagination has to come in. And in this case, he says, perhaps one of the ships has a mechanical problem and signaled for rescue. And, of course, Germans picked up on this, and now they have a bead on where they are. And now the German player would announce a signals action. That means the Germans are acting upon the information represented by the intel marker attached to the British trajectory. And of course this would, hold on a sec here. Now if that intel marker was not there, the German player could still act on the information presented by this trajectory. And of course they would do it by doing a naval search. And this is an important part. I did get a question, which I haven't, it was a private email, and he was like, what's the difference between a naval search and a signals action? And very basically, a naval search, you got to bring a force over, and you have to be in the hex. With the intel marker, no such requirement is there. There could be actually no task force on the map, and I could still do an intel. It doesn't matter how long the trajectory, it could be all the way, all 15, and there could be an intel marker on one spot, and I could just, with one signals action, just say, whoop, and it would pinpoint and turn that into a station right then and there. Any other time, you're going to have to whittle away with naval searches, and then you're just kind of breaking it down until you get down to a point where you'll roll good dice and get contact. And that's kind of the main thing is signals doesn't require dice rolls. Only naval searches do, and makes it trickier. So, on that note here, we go to, and the designer says it in his things. Let's say that's not there, and this is here. since the information on a trajectory is not as accurate or as helpful as the intel marker, the result is likely to be less dramatic than the signal's action. The picture is not likely to clarify, or when it does, it won't be helpful to the German player. Now, notice the German player has intel attachments as well, 3 of them, in fact. And that's because they're going through the channel and going through all these ports and all these air range fields. Nobody's not going to see you. That's why you get intel markers stuck to you every time you're essentially giving away, tipping your hand, telling you where they are. Those the intel markers here represent information the British have about the Germans. It means the British player, he has got 3 of them, that means he has excellent information. They will hinder the effectiveness of the German signals action. And also I'll note about the signals action, and that's very important as well. There's no interruption. A naval search has interruption if you have intel on your own trajectory force. Signals action has no such thing. You can see just how powerful that is when you see how powerful the intel markers are and how much information they give. So let's he goes through it here. So he does this intel marker was here, remember that? And I was just pulled it away for illustration. But now Germans do their signal action. Like I said, they don't have to roll any dice. They won't be interrupted. They don't even have to be in this hex to do it. I mean, it's just pure, you're a station now. Then they would time lapse and they'd invoke the intel limit and they would come off like that. And that's what the picture would look like after we did that. The situation clarifies, and that clarity is presented right here. The British task force is now a station. Its position in time and space is known. The German trajectory performs time lapse, and let's say its ships are fast. Okay. Intel limit is invoked, and the task force strives to steam through the channel once the intel marker is removed. Clarity has been achieved for the German player, but will it do them any good? Probably not, thanks to the intel markers still attached to the German task force. The convoy's position is known right now, but right now the German task force is somewhere between the North Sea and the convoy. And the British have usable information that can pinpoint the German task force somewhere in the English Channel. If they get the initiative, they are likely to act on that information, performing a signaled action of their own. Now, let's try a different look. Now let's pretend, let's do a lot of pretending here. And we're going to change the map. Now normally you get intel markers on here. Let's pretend they didn't. So effectively, the English Channel is blind, completely blind. Now the German player does the signals action. Yoink. Yoink. Now we got him here, but also remember the time lapse is gonna, like for a fast fleet, is gonna take 4 of these off. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now look at it. The clarity of the picture is quite different. If the Germans maintain the initiative, their next move will be an engage action. That's because we now know that the German task force slipped through the channel and is bearing down on the convoy. And incidentally, it's going to roll really high on the engage table because it's only going to be 2 trajectories and whatnot. And that just gives you the whole idea of how these intel markers and the intel limits, you saw how the difference between invoking intel limit, you're gonna, if you have a lot of intel markers, you can only move 1 with each intel limit you do in your time lapse. So you're going to be creeping along here, but when they're gone, fast fleet zoom, takes all those away, and now we're just right on top of this guy, and we're gonna probably pinpoint him. So, and that's why I suggest reading these this tutorial, the designer notes at the end of it's in the tutorial book at the end of it, design notes, page 52. Yeah, read these, and he's going to talk about what got him started on all this fog of war stuff. And one of the cases he started with was the Civil War. This is actually, he was trying to figure out how to do it in the Civil War. And he says, in the summer of 1862 in Virginia, General Pope had cornered half of Lee's army near a town called Centerville. He was pushing several brigades against it, holding it in place until his Ninth Corps commenced an assault sure to bring ruin to the Confederate army. Hours before, Pope had sent a rider to the commander of that Ninth Corps, instructing him to envelop the Confederate position. But now it was afternoon, and no attack could be heard from that quarter. Why? Because the 20,000 soldiers and horses of that corps were not located where Pope thought. They were farther away, much farther. And when its commander finally received the order, he scratched his head and gave orders to move towards the sound of the guns. Meanwhile, reports of the other half of the Confederate army marching on its flank trickled in all day. Pope dismissed that information until the hammer of Longstreet's assault landed. Confederates swept the field. Consider how remarkable this is. Pope managed to lose track of an entire corps, one of his own corps, while misreading intelligence about enemy positions. Incredibly, Pope lost track of his own troops. How can that be modeled without resorting to the impractical system of Kriegspiel? So, right. And you even see this in the movie Gettysburg. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and maybe I'll put in the clip here if I can find it. It's a clip where General Lee is berating Cavalry Commander Jeb Stuart for going AWOL.
General Stuart, your mission was to free this army from the enemy cavalry and to report any movement by the enemy's main body. That mission was not fulfilled. You left here with no word of your movement or movement of the enemy for several days. Meanwhile, we were engaged here, drawn into battle without adequate knowledge of the enemy's strength or position, without knowledge of the ground. So it is only by God's grace that we did not meet disaster here.
General Lee, there were reasons.
Perhaps you misunderstood my orders. Perhaps I did not make myself clear. Well, sir, this must be made very clear. You, sir, with your cavalry, are the eyes of this army. Without your cavalry, we are made blind. That has already happened once. It must never, never happen again.
And today, because of that, the Confederacy is a ghost, and the Union is still around and still wants your money. So, I hope this whole thing kind of gets our heads straight about what's going on. I'm still thinking about, do I really need to do a review of this? Because I'm just, touting the game so much as I play it along and just adding so many things here. And I think that Jeremy, the designer, is really bringing a new stride with this game here in how we think about war games and how we start putting in some more uncertainty and getting away from kind of the two demigods on top of Mount Olympus looking down and having perfect information and everything does exactly what they want when they want it. And apparently there's going to be more of these games in the series, and I can't wait. I think there's going to be Pacific ones. I really hope, and it's not clear whether it's really tricky, I really hope he does a Civil War, what he was originally trying to do. It gets a lot more complicated when you add in stuff like terrain and things like that. So I can see why he's balking at that. That's going to be quite complicated. I would love to see that because I've always wanted a really good Civil War games that did something like that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.